In the next two sections, we'll go over our second objective. What are the unique actions we can take? First, this section will discuss what marketers can do. Then we'll consider what users can do that a firm may want to anticipate. So as we recall, there's lots of potential objectives that we may desire by using social media. And there are lots and lots of different metrics we can use to evaluate whether a social media site or digital tool might be right for our strategy. So these should look familiar. So effectively, you'll see that they ask us, as with any other promotional tool, is, well, what is our reach? What is the frequency? To what extent will the people reached actually be part of our target market? And here are those big three measures again: CPM, CPC, and CPA. The interactive nature of the computer environment is the central reason we can measure performance in these new ways. And we don't have to even hope an impression was made. We can see, again, if someone actually clicked on an ad or social media post call to action, and whether that directly brought them to our store, or was even at least part of the customer journey. Very different from a regular billboard or magazine, which requires quite a few steps and unknowns on how touchpoints link together. And again, it could just be something like, we can tell they opened the email because a picture had to load. And so take a look and consider what measures you might use. And remember, you need to make sure they're ultimately tied to other direct objectives and outcomes you want, like brand familiarity, sales, and word of mouth. Speaking of word of mouth, this is a good time to talk about what's called the Net Promoter Score that we touched on in the Organizational Customers chapter, the B2B chapter. So the Net Promoter Score is a score that reflects your customer satisfaction and the actions they're willing to take due to that satisfaction. It's based on the question, how likely is it that you would recommend said brand to a friend or colleague? It is calculated by seeing what percentage of your customers are promoters minus those who are detractors. Having a high NPS score is good because that means they are more willing to promote your product for you to others. Very good for lead generation. However, if they are unhappy or even just neutral, those word of mouth can harm your brand because potential customers may turn away based on that first customer. That yellow band is what we call passives. These are customers that are somewhat satisfied, but are very liable to be taken away by competitors. So you can see how it's not just whether they like you, also, but opportunities to talk about you. So you can see how social media and digital tools may be very useful for bringing about more opportunities. And so a big thing for us is we have to remember that metrics can tell many different stories. Good interpretation requires you to know your assumptions and what types of external conditions might be at work. So imagine you're assessing an account for its followers or an account for its mutual connection. You're trying to see if this is an account you want to work with. So an account for its followers. So followers tends to reflect that it's a one way where these other accounts are linked to the user, like Twitter or Instagram. Meanwhile, mutual connections, as a two-way approval, accounts are linked to each other, like Facebook friends, where both sides have to say yes. So you can imagine, what if a person has 100 or 1,000 followers? Or what happens, does it mean that they have 50 mutuals or friends? Is this someone to work with? So we can consider how both do represent their social network or actual connections, and both could represent access to a group of like-minded or similar users, and therefore potential word of mouth or market power. But both of these don't necessarily, or are not necessarily accurate, especially if the user does not curate their users or followers. So do they cut them out? Do they just add everyone who asks? Both may have issues with duplicate accounts. Users may add fake accounts willingly for fun or as a sign of identity. The followers may be bots for those where there is no reciprocity by any user. So in sum, remember to look at numbers in light of different behaviors that may take place. So as an example, Instagram for some sectors, you may need 10,000 followers to be considered for free samples, and a lot more if you want to be actually paid for it, while others, maybe not so much. So here's an example of social network analysis, which helps you explore and visualize patterns found within collections of linked entities that include people. So they don't always have to be people. It could just be a certain user or a certain device or something. But usually we think of people. So here's a bit more detail on what social network analysis looks like. I don't expect you to learn this offhand real quick. I just want you to know it's there for you to learn. Notice how mapping the connections can help us better figure out how data might be passed on from person to person. So for example, for this group of conversation connections, you'll notice Heather is very important here. Without her, the information that Ike or Jane may know would otherwise go nowhere. But because Heather is here, their information is now their information. And Heather may be a very important opinion leader, and since she has so much access to like Diane, Garth, Beverly, Ed, all those folks. And so here's a fancier looking version here. And so effectively, the big key thing we study in social network analysis isn't just individual people, but the links in between. We study what relationships are present. So a couple examples is centrality is the number of connections any one person has, or node at least. Density is the percentage of connections, so big density here. Betweenness, how often the shortest path between two actors includes you. So it's another way to see how central you are to a network. In other words, how much are you like a bridge where if you disappeared suddenly, two groups would no longer be able to connect? Eigenvector centrality is one other. It's another measure of influence. It notes how important your immediate connections also tend to be. So not just what is your centrality, but what is the centrality of your connections. So Google PageRank tends to look at pages based on their connections. So we talked about different ways to measure. Now, we'll have a quick example about what else organizations can do with social media. Done right, social media can be inexpensive and a way to communicate with your customers. A tweet, a post, a picture, or other can go viral and spread outside of the social media site. This case highlights JetBlue's strategy to engage with customers through the use of Twitter. The all-you-can-jet promotion caught widespread attention both online and offline. Additionally, their constant monitoring of their Twitter feed and quick response to customers has gained them notoriety to the satisfaction of JetBlue and satisfied customers. Great strategy for low cost, and now it's assumed you'll do that. Something to reinforce is that social media can be useful for serving organizational customers as well. So 75% of B2B buyers use social media as part of their role and purchase decision. 74 to 84% of B2B marketers use social media marketing, and 48 to 54% do mobile marketing. So B2B organizations are on a variety of platforms, and effectively they're used to deepen relationships and drive interest. So we have lots of examples. So things like GE here, General Electric, drove customer interest by giving behind-the-scenes looks on Instagram alongside actual tours and historic content. People loved it. American Express got user-generated content on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook from proud owners in the Love My Store campaign, which also served to encourage those proud owners to post the American Express decals in their businesses. Decals encourage or remind customers to use their Amex cards. A common way social media is a part of the B2B buyer's journey is through content marketing. So there are lots of examples in the notes, and notice how interesting content works for both current or prospective clients, because it still centers on how your offering can be part of their solution. It's about problem recognition, connections alike, and people love stories, but relevant stories. In sum, organizations are ultimately made up of people, so social media can drive all sorts of customer outcomes, from impressions to actions. So posting those decals, signing up on a site for organizational customers. So next section, next section we're going to talk, what does social media let the users do? Albeit there's going to be, of course, a lot of discussion for what they do reflects what we'll have to do.